New Concord, Ohio wasn't on many maps until February 20th, 1962. It came to fame in a single day with an American adventure that history will call the John Glenn story.
The war started, and there was a competition between the Russians, the Soviet Union, and the United States over everything, primarily related to arms race, missiles, and technology. It was an embarrassing time in the late 50s, early 60s, because the Russians had launched Sputnik #1, which was the first missile to go into space and to launch a satellite that orbited the Earth, obviously. We'd attempted it and failed. The Russians put up a astronaut, Yuri Gagarin, who orbited the Earth. I think this was like 1961 or something like that. And other than that, it was just it was a tough time for everybody because we seemed to be behind in what they called the space race.
Roger, the clock is operating. We're underway. Loud and clear. Roger, we're programming and roll okay. A little bumpy along about here. Roger. Stand by for 20 seconds. Roger. 2, 1, mark. Okay. Does the capsule look like it's okay? Over. Capsule looks good.
John Glenn has streaked through 3 days and 3 nights and over 81,000 miles. Never a journey so far. Never a traveler so welcomed by the world.
The man who conquered outer space makes a new conquest as he takes New York by storm. There's been nothing like it in history. 35 years ago, Gotham went wild over Lindbergh when he returned from his solo hop across the Atlantic. And there have been many wild receptions to returning heroes since. But today tops them all, as Colonel John H. Glenn has the town at his feet. Up Lower Broadway from Bowling Green, the Colonel and his fellow astronauts are showered by a storm of torn paper and ticker tape. Only the tape is thinner, for modern stock market machines don't use the same tape that was such a part of receptions in decades past. How big is the crowd? It's well beyond accurate estimates, but we'll quote Mayor Robert Wagner. He puts it at 4 million, and the millions roar. They roar acclaim never before equaled in the city of traditional tributes to heroes.
I can't honestly remember what time of day the launch occurred, but I think it was sometime in the morning, like 10, 11 o'clock. Everybody was glued to their television, watching John Glenn, walk up the gangplank, get in the capsule, have him strapped into the capsule. Back in those days, it was on television, but we hadn't perfected television to the extent that, of course, it was black and white too, but it hadn't perfected television to the extent that you could go all the way up into space, watch the rocket, orbit, and do all the other things. But they did have a television or a camera inside the space capsule. So you did get to see John Glenn, what he was doing, all the way through not only the launch, but his 3 orbits around the Earth, and then the landing, of course. And he landed in a capsule with a big parachute around it in the ocean, picked up by a destroyer, and they helicoptered him from the destroyer to an aircraft carrier, and had photos or television, but that was all televised. So basically, I think the launch, from the launch to the time that he landed, was probably 3-4 hours, something like that. And so we all sit there glued to the television, watching the whole thing. And of course, when he landed, everybody felt this tremendous amount of pride, probably even cried a little bit because of the excitement. I mean, it was a great time to be an American, to see that happen. And John Glenn was such a great representative and such a great patriot. The interest of mine goes back to in the late 50s. we used to go to the movie when we were younger, and on Saturdays, and in between one movie and another, there was a serial, and it was called Flash Gordon, and Flash Gordon was also in a comic book and a cartoon character, and Flash was a astronaut in effect, who was from America, who had a spaceship, space rocket, and traveled all over the planets fighting Ming. I think he was called Ming the Miserable, or Ming the Merciless, I guess his name was. And so everybody's interest in space was sort of stimulated by the fact of this serial that was on the movies at the time I was growing up.
Do you consider John Glenn a national hero?
Well, absolutely.
Why?
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious.